Newt Gingrich yesterday, he basically said that this happening is forcing Republicans who don't like Trump to choose him anyway, because they're choosing between Trump or they're choosing between corruption.
I'm Stephanie Keith.
And I am Tara Manjakovich.
And we are unapologetically outspoken.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Freedom Friday. So, of course, we have to talk about what's going on with Trump. And I'm sure you guys are all sick of hearing about it already because it's on literally every media source on earth. But we have some different things that we're going to go over that you may not be aware of, you may not have heard about. So tune in and see what you think about all of this. So I'm going to start out with just going over the basics, just so we're all on the same page, because there were a few things that were going around that were completely misinterpreting the situation. So let's just set everything straight. So Trump was indicted on 34 counts of falsifying business documents. So again, we're just going to break it down real quick. These are not 34 different crimes. So that's the first thing. This all has to do with one situation with Stormy Daniels that we've all heard about, years ago, who threatened Trump that she would tell the public they had an affair if he didn't pay her, which, by the way, is extortion. And Trump's attorney at the time, Michael Cohen, paid her $130,000 to keep quiet and sign an NDA. Now, Cohen was DA Bragg's witness during the grand jury, yet his own boss took the stand and under oath said that Cohen is a liar and convicted felon who paid Stormy Daniels without Trump's knowledge and with his own funds. Then this Cohen later billed Trump in installments for attorney fees, not stating that they were particularly for Stormy Daniels. That's what they're alleging. And since there were 34 installments to pay back the attorney, that's why Trump is getting 34 counts of falsifying documents. So each individual count has a sentencing of up to 4 years in prison. So if you were to add them all together, that would be 136 years, which is obviously just ridiculous. And what you may not be aware of is another story that was reported also on April 4th by the Western Journal, where the Ninth U.S. Circuit Court of Appeals ordered Stormy Daniels to pay Trump an additional $121,000 in attorney fees, bringing her total to over $500,000 that the court has ordered her to pay Trump. So if that's not painting the picture enough, then let's go ahead and look at her attorney, Michael Avenatti, who is known for going after political conservatives. And this is the same guy who represented the women who falsely accused Supreme Court Justice Kavanaugh of sexual assault. He has since been indicted in both California and New York for various crimes, including extortion, fraud, and embezzlement. And he's now obviously disbarred, and was also sentenced to 14 years in prison. So when I found all that out, that paints a completely different picture of the entire story, in my opinion. But back to Trump. Normally, falsifying documents is just a misdemeanor. But if all of these counts are stacked onto one another and were used to commit another crime, then it becomes a felony, which is so far-fetched, but that's what they're doing here. So what surprised everyone, including Democrats and even CNN, was during the hearing on Tuesday, the crime was not revealed. Everyone was expecting some big surprise that they had in their back pocket, but there was nothing. So let's go ahead and hear what DA Alvin Briggs himself said after the hearing.
And they would then conceal another crime, but the indictment does not specifically say what those crimes were. We are assuming perhaps that they might be election related. Let me begin specifying what laws were also present.
So let me say as an initial matter, the indictment doesn't specify that because the law does not so require.
Okay, so yeah, no, they're not there because the law doesn't require him to tell us. Are you kidding me? So, I mean, this is the biggest arrest in the history of our country, but he's not going to tell the American public what the crime is. What? Like, what kind of bullshit is that? And then you have National Review that reported, quote, at the press conference he held after his subordinates unsuccessfully sought a gag order against the defense, Bragg cited New York election law, which doesn't apply to a federal race, a plan to make false statements to tax authorities. He didn't say whether these alleged misrepresentations were ever actually made, and a violation of federal campaign finance law, although it's doubtful the payments constitute campaign expenses. If Bragg had evidence that Trump committed sales tax or election law crimes, he wouldn't hesitate to charge them. And if he really thought he had jurisdiction to enforce federal laws, he'd have proudly cited campaign finance offenses as the crimes Trump was supposedly concealing, end quote. So there's nothing. Tara, this seems like just pure political persecution, or is it just that Bragg is fulfilling his campaign promise of, quote, getting Trump?
Well, Stephanie, this is absolutely political persecution. And quite frankly, it's abuse of our legal system. You know, the left agenda is very clear. It has nothing to do with any actual crimes. And it has to do with the fact that they'll basically do anything, no matter how ridiculous or asinine, to persecute Trump because he's a threat to the power structure that's basically trying to destroy our country. And I mean, let's look at the background with Trump, right? When he was president, the left tried to impeach him twice. And then he was literally the first president to be impeached as a private citizen. He was the first former president to have his home raided by the FBI. He was the first president to have confidential presidential conversations leaked to the media by the FBI strictly for the purpose of appointing a special counsel to remove him from office. Like, never in the history of our country has a current or former president been indicted. And the crimes that Trump are being indicted for, if you can call them crimes, is fucking laughable. Like, quite honestly, I don't give a fuck if he slept with a porn star 16 years ago. He wasn't president at the time. And this is such a chicken shit case. And I read this really great article. There's a Hoover Institution conservative historian named Victor Davis Hanson. And he was talking about how, again, no former president has ever been indicted, and there's a good reason for it. And specifically, he said, such prosecutions would be viewed as persecutions and render all former presidents veritable targets of every publicity-hungry and politically hostile local, state, or federal prosecutor. They would reduce the presidency to third world norms. Gratuitously prosecuting former presidents would become a political tool to harm the opposing political party or tarnish the legacy of a former president. And then I don't know if you saw this, but yesterday, former House Speaker Newt Gingrich spoke out, and he said that this indictment is sending a very bad and dangerous precedent that reminds him and me of what led up to the fall of Rome, which was exacerbated by economic issues, government corruption, and crime. And he did an interview with the Epoch Times where he said, quote, "It has to worry you to watch some of the stuff going on here, because now you have people on the left who are willing to abuse the law, do things that clearly have nothing to do with justice. It tells you how much they hate and fear Donald Trump. We've been through 7 years now of these constant attacks by the corrupt establishment against Trump, and they're going to continue for as long as he stays in public life." And that's absolutely true. I mean, even Trump in his post-arrest speech at Mar-a-Lago earlier this week, he said that even the rhinos and like hardcore Democrats are saying that there was no crime and that this never should have happened. You have the president of Mexico, Andre Manuel Lopez Obrador. He criticized the charges against Trump at a press conference on Wednesday. And he said this This indictment was politically motivated, and it was a smear campaign against Trump. And the Hungarian Prime Minister, Viktor Orban, also spoke out publicly against these charges. And then, of all people, Mitt Romney, who voted twice to convict Trump during his impeachment trials and publicly has claimed that Trump was unfit for office, even he said that Bragg has stretched to reach felony criminal charges in order to fit a political agenda. Specifically, he said, the prosecutor's overreach sets a dangerous precedent for criminalizing political opponents and damages the public's faith in our justice system, which is absolutely correct. And then you notice, like, there's not a lot of countries, aside really from Mexico and Hungary, who are speaking out about this. Why? Because everyone's just watching the fucking shit show that is going on in this country as we destroy ourselves from within. And I guess last week, Russian officials were asked about this whole Trump indictment, and a spokesperson for the Kremlin basically said, I don't think that's a topic for us to comment on. These are, internal US processes that we don't consider necessary to talk about. Why? Because they're fucking watching us destroy ourselves. Why do they need to talk about it?
Exactly. Exactly. And how pissed would you be if you lived in New York City and there's all these criminals and murderers running around and just getting let out of jail left and right, and then they spend all of their resources going after Trump for this, for like a misdemeanor bullshit case?
Well, Stephanie, according to Mayor Adams, New York City is the safest large city in the nation.
I would love to know what statistics he's looking at, because I've tried to find them. They don't exist. He's a fucking liar. And, if this had anything to do with the election, like, it's important to also realize that our Department of Justice, the Federal Elections Committee, the previous DA, and even Alvin Briggs himself said that they would not pursue this. Yet here we are. And, it's going to get thrown out. And the first reason it's going to get thrown out is because it was a federal election, meaning this DA has absolutely no jurisdiction over this whatsoever. And the next reason why it's going to get thrown out is because the statute of limitations in New York is 3 years for a misdemeanor and 5 years for a felony. This supposed falsification of documents took place in 2017. So it's past the statute of limitations. So again, like, how pissed would you be knowing all this, that they still used all these resources to go after him when there is real crime happening on the streets of New York every second of every day that they're completely ignoring?
Yeah. And now, I don't know if you know, like, there were two very left-leaning federal and state prosecutors that looked at all this evidence and they passed on it. And they both said that prosecuting this quote crime is infeasible because, like you mentioned, the statute of limitations, along with the fact that a state attorney is basically improperly appropriating the role of a federal prosecutor, and non-disclosure agreements are not strictly illegal. And then an article came out in the Washington Examiner yesterday. James Traynor, he's the commissioner of the Federal Election Commission, and he said that this is not even a campaign finance violation, and it's not a reporting violation of any kind. And that's why the FEC didn't take the case in the first place. And he said, like you just mentioned, it's going to be difficult for any judge or jury to come up with a different conclusion that there's a crime, since it's the FEC and the DOJ that prosecute federal campaign finance law, and they didn't want to prosecute this because there's no fucking case.
Yeah. Isn't it insane that one local DA completely destroyed our justice system? And now the precedent has been set, and any other local DA that wants to go after a president can. So let's listen to your favorite person, Karine Jean-Pierre, in the White House briefing following the hearing, because, I mean, this is the biggest news going on right now. So she surely has something to say about it, right? Let's hear.
And the president of the United States and the commander in chief, but go ahead.
He is, but as a lawyer, is he concerned at all that a local DA indicting a former president could down the line open up the possibility, set the precedent, that local DAs that don't like former President Biden could indict the commander? Why don't you have more to say about the Trump indictment?
It is an ongoing case, and I've been very clear about that. We've been prudent about that, not commenting on ongoing cases, and we're going to stick to that.
But for better or worse, all that anybody in the country is talking about at this exact moment while we're in here is Trump. And they look here to find out what the White House thinks about it. And well,
I think the American people should feel reassured that when there is an ongoing case like this one, that we're just not commenting.
And so does the lack of comment mean that you do not think anything happening in New York today is one of the top issues facing the country?
That's your assessment. That's not my assessment. I'm just laying out the facts that we are just not going to comment on an ongoing case from here. And we've been very consistent. We've been very prudent, and we're going to stick there.
You know what, Tara? She has been pretty consistent in never answering a fucking question. Like, what the heck? Has she ever answered a question fully?
Well, let's see, Stephanie, it's been over 2 years now. And aside from the one time that she very emphatically stated that aliens were not invading the country with the Chinese spy balloon issue, I've personally never heard her answer a question.
I mean, it's so ridiculous because this is the biggest story. Everyone in the world is watching it and they have nothing to say, not one comment. So, it brings up a great point, though, that what about all of these other people who have had way worse campaign funding violations? So you have Hillary Clinton, who spied on Trump's campaign and used campaign funds to pay for a phony dossier that led to an investigation of a sitting president and impeachment. And her campaign only had to pay a fine of $113,000 for that. There were 0 criminal charges filed against her. We also know that her and Bill Clinton paid off women when he ran for president and no one was criminally charged. Then we have Obama. So another story you might not be aware of is that this week as well, Leonardo DiCaprio, the Titanic actor, took the stand in a case involving the Obama campaign. Lauren Overholtz of Fox News reports, quote, Joe Low, also known as Low Take Joe, I have no idea if I said that right, has been accused of stealing billions of dollars from a Malaysian state investment fund. Pras Mikkel is accused of funneling money for Joe Low into Barack Obama's 2012 election campaign, end quote. So it'll be interesting to see what goes on now that the precedent has been set with Trump, because we already know that the FEC levied one of its biggest fines ever against Obama's campaign for hiding donors and keeping illegal donations.
Yeah, Stephanie, when I first saw this story, I was like, who the fuck are Joe Low and Pras Michelle or whatever it is? And then I read that Michelle or Michael, he was a member of the Fugees. Do you remember the Fugees?
I do, yeah.
They were like a fairly popular hip hop group back, I think, the early 90s. But anyway, Lowe basically gave this Michelle guy $21 million that was donated to Obama's election campaign by funneling the money to political committees through a series of, I guess they're called straw donors, in an attempt to conceal the fact that the money was being funded because it's illegal for foreigners to donate to U.S. campaigns. And according to the DOJ, they were involved in this conspiracy in order to gain access to Obama and to influence Obama. And during this case, according to prosecutors, China's Vice Minister of Public Security, who was a member of the CCP, was also involved in this scheme, which involved pushing to send some Chinese dissident back to China. So let's see what happens with that whole case, because there's a lot going on there too.
But it's a lot worse than Stormy Daniels, that's for sure.
Yeah, just a little bit. But back to the Trump incident, it's clearly, like I said before, total hypocrisy from the left. It's a blatant abuse of power. In that article that I referenced earlier from Victor Davis Hanson, he talked about 20 different instances where recent political officials had violated laws and were never arrested and not even slapped on the hand. You already mentioned the laundry list of criminal shit that Hillary got away with. Destroying federally subpoenaed emails and devices to hide evidence, sending classified government communications through the unsecured server at her home, hiring a foreign national who was prohibited from working on presidential campaigns to compile the Steele dossier to smear Trump, and then hiding the payments to him through her deceptive bookkeeping. You mentioned Bill Clinton. He used one of his cronies to search out a high-paying New York job for one of his lovers in order to influence her testimony before a special counsel. And he received like $500,000 honorarium payment for speaking in Moscow when Hillary was Secretary of the State and approved North American uranium to be sold to Russia. And then Obama apparently conducted some quid pro quo arrangement with Putin. I didn't know about this one, where he basically promised to be flexible on missile defense during his reelection bid if Putin would give him, quote, space. And that led to the abandonment of the key joint missile defense systems with Poland and the Czech Republic. And then less than 2 years later, Russia invades eastern Ukraine and Crimea. And what do? Absolutely nothing. And then there's obviously the never-ending list of illegal, unconstitutional, and treasonous shit that's been done by the Biden family and the Biden administration, like Biden using U.S. foreign aid money as leverage to have a Ukrainian government file a prosecutor who was looking into the Biden family's efforts to sell influence to corrupt Ukrainian interests. He basically set up his entire family operation, laundering money from the Ukraine, Russia, and China. Not to mention the classified documents that he took when he was vice president without any authority to declassify them. And then they were found like an Easter egg hunt all over these various unsecured offices, homes, and garages. And then it just came out yesterday that more documents were found in Chinatown. Like, what the fuck? And then Hansen, in the same article, he talked about all of the corrupt shit that has been done by the weaponized FBI officials, like when subpoenaed mobile phone records were wiped clean, and when Andrew McCabe lied under oath on 4 occasions to federal investigators when he was the interim head of the FBI, or when CIA Director John Brennan admittedly lied under oath to Congress on at least 2 occasions, and so did the Director of National Intelligence, James Clapper. And then obviously the James Comey issue. He was the former FBI director, and he apparently claimed ignorance 245 times while under oath during the Hillary Clinton email case, and then deliberately leaked Trump's classified memo to the media in order to appoint a special counsel to investigate him. And then there was all the money that the FBI and the CIA paid to Twitter to monitor and suppress, quote, disinformation and news stories that weren't in alignment with the left's political narrative. So there's a litany of shit that has been going on that are actual fucking crimes. And then we have this bullshit.
Just think about like just what we know. Imagine how many more crimes like no one knows about. And think about it. Every single organization has vetted Trump, gone after him, tried to dig up dirt on him for the past 7 years and found nothing. Nothing. And then you have these people that it's a laundry list that's never ending and not a fucking thing happens to them.
Yeah. Yeah. And I'm going to quote something from this article because it's like so fucking on point. He says, "What are we to make of these radical, disparate applications of law and protocols? The left repeatedly breaks laws and long-held customs with impunity by weaponizing federal offices and bureaus, whether defined in the legal sphere by mostly exempting 120 days of mass rioting, looting, arson, mayhem, and lethal violence in the summer of 2020, or procedurally denying the House Minority Leader the right to nominate his party members and committees, or ceremoniously having the Speaker of the House tear up the presidential State of the Union address on national television. By any fair application of past tradition in the law, Joe Biden and Alejandro Mayorkas should be impeached for their deliberate efforts to subvert U.S. immigration laws for political purposes. By any just measure, Joe Biden should be the target of a special counsel's investigation to ascertain how and why the Biden family received hidden funds from foreign governments and whether Biden himself paid taxes on such large funds." So my question is like, at what point is mainstream American public going to decide like we've had enough of this blatant hypocrisy and like hijacking of our government by the left? It's honestly getting scary. Like, it's one thing you have, prominent radio hosts or politicians or important figures that are criticizing and calling out what's happening. But what about people like us? Yeah, we have a podcast and we're talking about it. But the majority of America, like, what are they supposed to do, right? And so I read an interview actually with this Hansen guy, and he said something that I thought was interesting. And he said, The United States is entering an unsettling new era characterized by chronic dysfunction. And he talked about how this whole thing with Trump being indicted is happening in a time when so many Americans are like already discontented with the state of the country. And he said they're engaging in a silent revolution. And he said half the country is basically just disconnecting and turning away from cultural institutions that are promoting all of these progressive ideologies. He talked about how like people don't watch the Oscars or the Grammys or the Tony Awards anymore. You and I have talked about how, you know, when these companies go totally woke and they just start losing business. He brought up how, and even like something as popular as the NBA, like their viewership has plummeted, and the 2023 NBA All-Star game had less than 5 million viewers, which was a 27% decrease from
That's
last.
shocking.
Yeah, it
That's
was
terrible.
Yeah, it was the biggest single season decline since the year 2000. And he talked
Good.
about, you know, millions of Americans are so frustrated and angry, but instead of turning to violence like the left does, what do? They pick up and they move to red states, or they take their kids out of public schools and they homeschool them or send them to Christian schools that don't teach all the DEI shit. And it's like he went on to cite, you know, we've talked about this before, the mass numbers of people fleeing California and other liberal states. And he said that this indictment of Trump has only made people even angrier. But like normal, quote, Americans don't resort to violence, right? Or at least we haven't at this point. But honestly, how far can the American public be pushed with this kind of shit? And then there's the question of whether, you know, is this indictment helping or hurting Trump when it comes to his 2024 bid for presidency? And Newt Gingrich yesterday, he basically said that this happening is forcing Republicans who don't like Trump to choose him anyway, because they're choosing between Trump or they're choosing between corruption. And as of yesterday morning, Trump raised over $8 million in 4 days after this indictment. And there was a Yahoo News U.gov poll that was taken right after the indictment that found that 57% of people actually are supporting Trump over DeSantis for this presidential bid. And then a Reuters poll, I thought this was interesting. A Reuters poll released on April 3rd showed that 48% of Republicans back Trump, which is up 44% from a poll that was taken just a few weeks ago. So
Yep.
like this indictment is obviously, like, what direction is this going in? Is this helping or hurting him?
Totally helping him.
Right.
I mean, look at you and I. We were both like, oh my gosh, we really don't want him to run again. Like, we really don't want to deal with all this bullshit again. And now I'm like, no, like, I'm going to totally freaking back him because everyone wants to back the underdog. No one likes a bully. And
Right.
this guy has been bullied more than any of us in our entire lifetimes combined. And I think that normal, decent human beings that aren't filled with hatred see that and know it's wrong and are sick and tired of it.
Yeah. And even Gingrich said, he said that he believes Biden's like clear fucking policy failures are going to make it more likely that Trump will win and become the first president since Grover Cleveland in the late 1800s to lose an election and then come back and win the next election.
Yeah, I think it's really helped him a lot. And I mean, it'll be interesting to see what happens if DeSantis decides to run or not, but they totally fucked DeSantis. Like no one, like everyone is focused on Trump now. And I just think like they've totally screwed themselves in every possible way. And in another way, where this whole entire thing is going to backfire and hurt the Democrats, especially Biden, is because the House Oversight Committee Chairman, James Comer, we've heard a lot from him lately, he said that there are already 2 Republican DAs that want to prosecute Biden. And this was posted in the New York Post. So they haven't waited even a full 48 hours and they're ready to go after Biden. So things should get very spicy in this election. So get your popcorn ready, everyone. It's going to be one heck of a show. And Tara and I are going to keep you updated every step of the way. But thanks so much for tuning in. I hope that you learned something new here. Have a great weekend, you guys, and we'll see you back here on our Motivation Manifestation Monday. If you enjoyed this episode, share it with a friend, and don't forget to subscribe to the podcast so you get our latest episodes every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. And if you could, please rate and review the show. We are going to be reading every single review, and I would love it if you hopped over to Instagram at Unapologetically Outspoken and say hi. We want to see who's out there and start a conversation, plus get all of the topics that you want us to talk about next. Thank you so much for tuning in, and we'll see you next time.